It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Coal.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Coal. In the studio with me today is Marion Clement. She's Executive Director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, located right here in Annapolis. Thank you for joining me today, Marion.
Thank you so much, Donna, for having me today.
Okay, tell our listeners what the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership is.
The partnership is really about bringing the diverse partners that are already doing wonderful conservation work in Maryland together to really streamline bird conservation and to leverage our resources to increase the capacity of our partners. And so by bringing all the different partners together, we're able to come up with new creative solutions for the threats that our birds are faced with today, as well as ways that we can effectively work together to ramp up conservation efforts in Maryland.
And you're a state agency? Part of a state agency?
We are not. We are partly funded through state funds, both federal and Maryland state, but we really are not an official legal entity. What we are about is our partners, and so we're not even a nonprofit, and that will probably stay that way for a while. We are essentially just a coordination organization that brings everybody together in discussion.
And by everybody, I'm looking at some of these. Maryland Department of Natural Resources, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Maryland Ornithological Society, Jug Bay,
yep.
Conservation Community Consulting, U.S. Geological Survey. They're actually Audubon, Maryland Nature Conservancy, American Bird Conservancy, National Wildlife Federation, Ducks Unlimited, Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, 1,000 Friends of Maryland, Chesapeake Conservancy, and Maryland League of Conservation Voters. There's probably more. Lights Up Baltimore, too. That's quite a list of groups.
Yeah, and we're really still working on expanding our list of partners. The conservation of birds revolves around habitats, obviously, and threats such as pollution, the health of our watershed. So there's really quite a lot of diversity of partners that we can bring in, and that's our goal here, is to think outside of the box about how we can work together outside of just these very obvious bird organizations. So we're really hopeful to work with the different water quality oriented organizations in our state as well.
We're still looking for more partners, even people like for-profit companies, for instance.
Exactly. Yeah? We're working across the public and the private sectors, and that's really the strength of being able to create this coalition, is that we're opening the dialogue across partners that wouldn't normally be working together.
You know, I recently did a story about BGE putting the covers on osprey nests on utility poles, and they came back when asked about, would you put something else up for the osprey since you put this cover on and they're trying to make the nest, and they did come back and put it up. They said it's, they have to keep in mind cost, but there you go. There's a perfect potential partner.
Exactly. And we are working to partner in the future with BGE on power line projects and ospreys as well.
Very good. And on your website, which is marylandbirds.org, I saw 1/3 of our state's birds are species of greatest conservation need. Solving the complexity of threats to our state's birds requires diverse partnership, maintained collaboration, and extensive public research. There are probably some out there that don't know what greatest conservation need means.
Absolutely. It's a status designated by the state. Essentially, every state gets funding from the federal government in order to pursue research and conservation efforts for wildlife needs. And that federal pot of money is awarded to states only if every 10 years they create a very detailed and comprehensive state wildlife action plan. Now, that's a public resource, and a lot of our partners are using it to guide their conservation efforts. But essentially, it's a document that goes into thorough research and detail about which species in our state are currently in decline or in danger of declining rapidly due to habitat change change of food source, climate change. And so it's a special status reserved for species that aren't threatened or endangered yet in our state, but are at risk of becoming so. And so it's essentially a watch list that enables our partners to know exactly what species they need to be working on. In Maryland, even though we have a high diversity of birds, we have 443 species, 143 of those, which is 1/3, as you said, are species of greatest conservation need. And that's a daunting task.
That's scary. When we come back, this, of course, is dependent on federal funds. Let's find out about concern about that ahead. This is Donna Coal. This is the 1430 Connection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Coal. In the studio with me is Marion Clement. She's Executive Director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, which has put together a group of a lot of great nonprofits, government entities, and for-profit companies. We're just talking about the funds that go into this program, including the funds that are going into all of these agencies that are partners with you, are coming from the federal government.
Yeah, so essentially they're coming from the Pittman-Robertson Fund, and that's a tax leveraged on ammunition and guns. And in Maryland, it has been used towards non-game species as well. So we've been very fortunate to have the support of the Department of Natural Resources to give us some of those funds. And then the Maryland Ornithological Society is a generous contributor as well. They're an organization that's very focused on birding, and Maryland is very fortunate in that we have tons of birders, and so there's a great capacity to involve those citizens in conservation science, and so they've been able to support our effort as well. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife is contributing with office space and travel, et cetera, et cetera. We're fortunate in that we do have several nonprofit partners and for-profit as well that have bought into the partnership. And so when you're starting an initiative like that, it's always a struggle about how long can you sustain yourself, how much money do you need to get from grants, and we do have grants which would support staff time if they were to be awarded, but even those grants maybe are at threat as well. So it's definitely walking a fine line. That's the nature of this type of work, unfortunately, but we're made up of a lot of passionate people, so we're hoping that through the great work that we've already done in less than a year, we'll be able to convince our supporters to continue supporting us.
Speaking of the great work that you've done, can you name some of the great work that you have in progress right now or that's been accomplished already?
Absolutely. And the bald eagle nest monitoring program is on my mind just because I took a few calls from our nest monitors this morning. This is a program that is in its second year, so it's still very much in an infancy state. It's been absolutely great so far. It's building upon the long-term data set that DNR, the Department of Natural Resources Wildlife and Heritage Program, was collecting when bald eagles were listed federally because of DDT impacting their eggshells.
Just to go back, DDT was used as a pesticide in the 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
And then it became known primarily because of Rachel Carson's work, Silent Spring,
Absolutely.
that DDT was killing birds and bird eggs, didn't give them a chance to grow to fruition.
Yeah, and those that were most impacted are top predators because of the bioaccumulation of toxins throughout the food system. At a eutrophic level, in other words, if something eats something, which then eats something, the final top predator is the one that is the most impacted. So raptors, ospreys, eagles, hawks were at grave danger of becoming extinct because their eggs weren't viable.
Which explains why, for those that grew up in the 70s, like for instance me, never saw these birds around. And today, now you see them flourishing all over, including Anne Arundel, Queen Anne's counties, and that's thanks to Rachel Carson.
Absolutely. So essentially when the bald eagles were delisted, the Department of Natural Resources stopped with this long-term monitoring program of our bald eagles in our state. And so really, although, visually we know that they're doing very well in our state, they're expanding their range in Maryland, we don't really have a solid estimate of how many are actually reproducing in our state. Bald eagles obviously are very charismatic. Through this citizen science program, program, we're training volunteers to monitor nests. Essentially, they're reporting nests back to us, and then we have the database back from DNR about where some of the locations of these past nests were. We're able to assign nests to them, and the volunteers are feeding us data about whether the nests are successful, whether the nests are inactive, no adults breeding this year, and then how many chicks are able to fledge. And that gives us very important data in the long term, because bald eagles remain top predators in our state, which means that they are highly susceptible to changes, for example, in the degradation of our watershed and our aquatic life. Fish is one of their top prey items, or coastal development, or changing storms. For that reason, it's still important to monitor them.
So the volunteers go out 2 to 3 times a year, yes?
3 is really the minimal amount. It is a minor requirement, but we essentially need our volunteers to collect within 3 periods of the season data about when the eagles first start to mate, when they are incubating, and then once the chicks start to become big enough that you can see them kind of hopping around in the nest, and when they fledge.
So by the time people are listening to this, it's already too late to volunteer for this year?
So it's really not, because we have more than 600 nests in our database, and although we've been very successful at attracting volunteers, we have, I believe, more than 60 now, and we have 200 nests assigned.
Well.
But even though it's late in the season and some of that earlier data won't be captured if people join in later, there is still the opportunity to volunteer, because we have quite a lot of nests that are not being monitored.
And plus the birds aren't going to fledge until what?
July, late
Oh,
July.
really?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, when we come back, more about what you can do to help Maryland birds. This is Donna Coal. This is the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Coal. In the studio with me is Marion Clement, Executive Director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. We are, of course, talking about birds, my favorite subject. We know now that they are doing a bald eagle nesting survey. They need volunteers for it. If you're listening and you want to help,
we have a project coordinator. The email address is coordinator@marylandbirds.org. Also, there's our phone numbers on our website,
marylandbirds.org.
Also, we have a Facebook group so that our registered monitors can communicate with each other, send each other updates about what they're seeing, photography, etc. So it's been really successful so far.
And if you aren't one of the monitors, can you still join the group?
Yeah, you can. It is a public group.
And what's it called?
It's called the Maryland Bald Eagle Nest Monitoring Program.
So they need people to go out to nest. They have 600 documented in the state. They only have 200 assigned right now to volunteers. Yeah. That leaves 400 more people needed.
Yeah, and we're always looking for people to report nests that they cite to us as well, because then we double check with our database and we make sure that we have a record for them.
But not publicly. Do this through email or through a telephone call. In other words, you don't want people relaying this information to you about nests publicly. You don't want everybody in the world knowing about them, right?
Right. It is sensitive information, but we are working towards in the future hopefully being able to publicize some of them, just so that volunteers have the opportunity to see whether this is a known nest site or not.
How about a camera like we have down at the Arboretum or some of the other places? Do we have thoughts on getting a camera out?
I don't know that we have one in Maryland yet, so that's a very good point.
You also have a sandhill crane project you need help with?
This year we wanted to join the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Survey and conducting one in Maryland. Now, we didn't get enough individuals within the survey period. We didn't get any submissions for that this year.
But this coming fall, the fall of 2017, and then going forward 18.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity to survey. We might change the survey period so that we can capture individuals. That's still in the work. It was its very first year last year. So.
And any particular county, especially because I don't know that we've had them in Anne Arundel County.
The Eastern Shore.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's also the important bird areas,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
That's another big opportunity to volunteer with us, and it's exciting. Important bird areas are designations from Audubon, and essentially citizens were involved in finding out the most important areas for birds in our state. Now, these are areas that are havens for birds that are currently threatened or birds that are habitat specialists like grassland birds, or early successional habitat. And then they also include areas that just have a high density and diversity of birds as well. So essentially, these are the green areas left in our state that we really want to work towards conserving for avian diversity. And so now that they have been designated, we have 43 in our state, and you can go to Audubon's website and see where they are. We want to create a monitoring program so that, future impending threats to those areas can be mitigated by having really good on-the-ground data about what species are using these habitats. And we also want to focus on some questions in terms of habitat management for some of them. So there's a good opportunity here for citizens who are expert birders or advanced birders to come and essentially help us with these surveys to collect important information about these areas.
Okay, and you assign the area to...
Yes, we do.
All right, very good. Again, on the website, it's marylandbirds.org to find out information on all of these. Are you thinking of, or is there a bird trail as there is in other states? Would that be helpful to Maryland to have something along these lines?
That's really interesting that you're asking that. It's actually in the works with the Maryland Ornithological Society, so you'll be hearing about that shortly, I think.
Tourists will go to states just because of something like a bird trail.
Absolutely.
Which is documented on a website. There's pamphlets about it. It tells you all the great stops along the way.
Yes.
Something along those lines? Is that
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And MOS is already pioneering a good bit of that.
With the interest in birding growing and nature photography growing, and it's off the charts, it seems like, I would think that would be huge to capitalize on.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Marion had another project she wanted to highlight, but we didn't get to it. I had her call in, and here she explains that other project.
The partnership is creating working groups. These right now are our database committee, our education committee, and our conservation research and management committee. And so all these committees are staffed by our partners, and they're working on different issues and topics together. So the database committee is working towards creating a principal gateway for researchers and citizens to get access to information on different monitoring programs that are currently ongoing in Maryland or have been done in the past. And so currently folks such as land conservation planners and researchers really have to do quite a bit of digging to get at the information that is currently available or at past research projects. And so this would be a way to really wrap all of that information in one site in Maryland, and also perhaps even create visualization tools where we can map different avian monitoring data as well.
That's great. So, for instance, with a species that's very threatened, this is a place to go right to it and find out what others have researched, what others are finding.
Yeah, it's a way to highlight the monitoring efforts that are already happening in Maryland and to safeguard them so they don't get lost. And it's a way to even promote further research, because you're allowing researchers to kind of have a broad overlook and a sense of, okay, what's already happening in our state and what might be missing as well.
All right, very good. Marion, thank you so very much for joining me today here at WNAV.
Thank you.
This is Donna Coal. This is the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.